Well, hello, my friends. How's it going? Welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons and Dragons. We theorycraft about them. We crunch numbers, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way to build and play a character in the hopes of creating something that is both, admittedly, really powerful, but also, more importantly, really fun to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build and play something that you're thinking about doing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being here. My name's Colby, not Cody, coincidentally. I get a lot of comments calling me Cody, which is fine. I would actually answer to both. Anyway, if you would like to get a written step-by-step guide, cheat sheet to help you recreate this character for yourself so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the video or take notes, or if you're just looking for a way to give some additional support to myself and the channel, I would appreciate it if you would consider joining as a member. There's a little join button down there. For $2 a month, you get access to the library of write-ups, of cheat sheets that I do for each one of these builds, and it really helps me out a lot too. So huge shout out and thank you to my channel members. Really appreciate you guys, and for everybody else, I also really appreciate you. Just watching and liking and subscribing especially, and commenting are all also great ways to support the channel, so thanks. All right, it is my last video of the year, 2022. It has been such an amazing year, thanks in no small part to you. Just FYI, I'm not going to be releasing a video next week, the first week of January, as I'm going to be taking a little time off to spend some time with my family during the holidays. I hope you can forgive me. But for the video today, I've kind of had a fun little idea brewing for quite some time now that I've been saving for like the finale of 2022. Let's see what you think. Undoubtedly, my most popular video of all time, and probably the one that maybe most people know me for, I suppose, is Bladesinger 2.0, which is kind of hard for me to watch now, to be honest. The lighting, the camera work, little to no editing. Ugh. I mean, I'm hard enough to watch as is. But as probably everyone knows by now, I love Bladesingers. But probably my most used subclass, if you take a look at all of the videos that I've done on this channel over the last 2.5 years, is, yeah, the Hexblade Warlcok, including my second most viewed video of all time, the one that started it all, the Hexblade Warlcok, or the Pamlock as I called it. And yeah, I have taken Hexblade on a lot of character builds over the years. Admittedly, a lot fewer in like the last year than I did maybe in that first year. I mean, heck, I even did a double Hexblade build for one of my very first like 2-character team-up builds, right? The Yin and the Yang, which my friend Dallin and I played to quite great effect, I think, during our little 10K subscriber gauntlet celebration video that we did. And it was really effective, not surprisingly, I suppose. Why do I use Hexblade so much? Partly because, well, they're really strong, especially if you're a character who wants to make both weapon attacks and cast charisma-based spells, right? But that right there is actually the second reason that I use them so much, because I love Gishes. Some of you may be asking, where did the term Gish come from? What does it mean? It's an old term that was used to describe actually an enemy in AD&D. It was a Githyanki, and they made weapon attacks and also were a spellcaster. And so that just kind of caught on as an idea for players to use and build a character after that fashion, to be both a weapon damage dealer and a spellcaster, right? No question. My favorite characters to play and build are ones who can both sling spells and use weapon attacks in combat to great effect. And I think if you asked most D&D aficionados which 2 classes or subclasses were the best, like, Gishes in the game, most would probably vote for the Hexblade and the Bladesinger as the top 2. In fact, a lot of you probably know I conducted a poll a couple of weeks ago to test this theory, and yeah, I think I was right. Or at least viewers of my channel seem to agree. Maybe I've made them biased. So what if we combined the two? What if we took my most popular subclass video and my most oft used subclass in my videos into one glorious Gishy character. Would we create a super Gish? Or would the two subclasses not really synergize all that well and leave us with something that is somehow less than the sum of its parts? I am super excited to find out. Now, let me say this before we jump in. I think if you're going to try to combine a Bladesinger and a Hexblade, you've got to understand what the strengths and weaknesses of each of them are and let those guide you as you try to figure out how to build and play the character. First off, one of the greatest strengths of the Bladesinger is their extra attack feature, which very uniquely allows you to make one weapon attack and then cast one cantrip with a single attack action, right? Okay, considering that, what is the highest damage dealing cantrip in the game? Altogether now, Eldritch Blast, when you spec for it. So that right there stands out as something we want to try to take advantage of when combining a Bladesinger and a Hexblade, right? We want to be able to make weapon attacks and effective Eldritch Blasts with the same action. Got it. Of course, for Eldritch Blast to be as effective as possible, we need a high charisma score, because that's what the plus to hit and plus to damage is based on, yeah? That is going to make us very mad, multiple ability score dependent, if we're also trying to multi-class Bladesinger. Except for the fact that one of the greatest strengths of the Hexblade is their ability to make weapon attacks with their charisma modifier as well as their spell attacks, right? Okay, so in that case, what would be the hardest hitting weapon for us to use? I think most people would agree that the three hardest hitting non-magic item weapons in 5e would be either something that can take advantage of the Great Weapon Master feat, the Shadow Blade, my favorite. Oh, I'm gonna run out of cards fast. Is that 3 already or 4? I don't know. Or something that can take advantage of the Sharpshooter feat. All right, let's look at each of them. As for the Great Weapon Master weapon, it's important to note that your Hex weapon, the thing that lets us make weapon attacks with our Charisma modifier, can't have the two-handed property unless you're going to get Pact of the Blade, which means a 3-level investment into Warlock. What's more, Bladesingers don't really benefit from their Blade Song if they are using two hands to make weapon attacks. So regardless of whether or not we had Pact of the Blade, two-handed weapons are no-go here. This means if we want our weapon to hit as hard as possible, we're going to want to use Shadow Blade for our weapon, right? As I so often do. Well, not so fast. Rules as written, Shadow Blade is a little clunky to try and use as a Hexblade's Hex weapon. With the Hex weapon, we're told that when we finish a long rest, we can touch a weapon and it becomes our Hex weapon. I think that probably at most tables anyway, this means that you're gonna need to do this thing right after you finish a long rest, based on the way it's worded. And since Shadow Blade only lasts for 1 minute, unless you're fighting right after you get out of bed in the morning every day, trying to do this might be wasting a spell slot, if nothing else. Not only that, but the question would also arise, for me at least, okay, I make Shadow Blade my Hex weapon, it goes away later on in the day when I recast Shadow Blade. Am I summoning the exact same weapon and could I therefore count it as my Hex weapon still? What if in the morning I made the Shadow Blade my Hex weapon with a 2nd level spell, but then later I upcast it to a 3rd level spell to do more damage? Is it the same weapon or is it a different one? So yeah, at the very least, it's messy. Let's avoid that. So, okay, if we're not going Shadow Blade and we can't use a two-handed weapon due to Bladesinger restrictions, what would be the best weapon for a Hexblade mixed with a Bladesinger to use? I think through the process of elimination, the answer becomes fairly obvious. The hand crossbow. With the right feats, it can get both a weaponized bonus action attack with the same single weapon, thus allowing us to still use charisma for all of our attacks, and can also benefit from the almighty sharpshooter, making it, yeah, one of the hardest hitting weapons in the game, as most of you probably know. And I mean, I've never actually built a ranged Bladesinger, or a ranged Hexblade for that matter, on this channel. So if we're going to do something using sort of my two quintessential subclasses, we might as well do something different to differentiate them a bit here, I think, and go with a ranged sustained damage build. Finally, I know, sorry, long preamble, one word of warning. This build is not going to be super great, damage-wise at least, until level 7. One level beyond where Bladesingers typically hit their real power spike, right? Due to the multi-classing. So, if you're playing a low-level campaign, I would not advise taking this character to the party, personally. Instead, I think I'd probably just go straight Hexblade or straight Bladesinger. But if you're playing well into the mid and even late game, it will be fantastically gishy and super fun and, spoiler alert, really powerful. And so, I proudly present episode 123, the HexBladeSinger. Before we go any further, though, I want to read you guys the description for this character that the team over at dScryb has come up with, since they're the sponsor for the video this week. From the mist strides a cowled figure, their eyes a lambent glow. The bandit leader turns from a cowering elf and sneers, "Walk away, stranger, this ain't your fight." He gestures to his companions, who move forward, blades ready. The newcomer flicks aside their cloak while simultaneously drawing an esoteric-looking handbow. Time seems to stop. The stranger begins to sing, and ghost-like tendrils coalesce about their suddenly moving form. The nearest bandit collapses, a crossbow bolt exploding through her chest. Dancing around desperately slashing brigands, the outsider thrusts out a hand, voice a crescendo, eldritch energies erupting from their fingers. Attackers twist away, bodies torn open, dying in agony. Still wreathed in intangible phantoms, the spellbow calmly reloads, raises their weapon, and nonchalantly shoots the gaping bandit leader through the heart. I swear they just keep getting better, right? For those who don't know, dScryb is a fantastic tool that lets players and DMs alike get professionally written descriptions of almost anything you can imagine wanting a description for in a D&D game. Not just settings, but also characters, attacks, dialogue, spells, magic items, etc. And if it hasn't already been written, you can request that they create something for you, with the right subscription level, of course. But even with a free account at dScryb, you can get access to thousands and thousands of searchable descriptions in their massive library, and it grows every day. And yes, they provide so much more than just box text like descriptions. And my favorite thing that they've added recently is what I talked about a couple of weeks ago, the new Sonic library. You want to put your players in a dark cave passage or an abandoned shack with a fireplace? Well, now you not only can get an amazingly written description of that location that you can read to your players to set the mood when they first enter, but with the click of a button, you can even get the perfect sound to match the description, all in one place at dScryb. Now, to get access to the Sonic library, you need to have a composer level subscription, which is only a few bucks a month, and it gives you access to not only all the audio files, but also a composition tool that lets you prep your game by searching, storing, and then playing sound, and even a web player that's free to your players. So if you're playing online together with a virtual tabletop, you can click play on your audio and they will hear it on their end in real time. Now, when I first talked about the Sonic library a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of thinking, okay, they've got this composer level subscription. Wouldn't it be cool if they had just one single subscription that would give you access to basically everything that dScryb offers, including all of the descriptions, the maps, and the audio? Well, guess what? Now you can. Introducing the Celestial subscription level. For less than 15 bucks a month, you can have it all. I really think it's a fantastic everything you want tool to truly help you create the perfect environments to immerse your players in the world you've so painstakingly and lovingly created for them. So to learn more, just go to dScryb.com/D4. Please use that link so that they know I sent you. I'll put it in the video description, of course. If you decide to purchase a subscription, whether at the Celestial level or any other, use the code D4 at checkout to get 10% off your purchase. Huge thanks to dScryb, you guys rock, and let's jump into the build. All right. At level 1, if I'm going to make a character that has any Hexblade levels, I almost always want to start off as a Hexblade, or maybe take the dip at level 2 at the latest. The thing is, if we're going to be building a character in order to make their attacks with charisma at some point, we're typically best being able to do that right from the beginning, so we don't have to be relying on a crappier ability score for our attacks in early levels. Plus, the proficiencies that Hexblades get are nice to have if we're otherwise going for a spellcaster build. So yes, for our starting class, we're starting off as Hexblade. When we first meet our champion, they have made a pact with an otherworldly patron whose force is manifested in our realm by a weapon. Your lovely crossbow, Bianca. Any other Dragon Age fans out there? Do you guys love Absolution? Might be time for a replay. I miss Liliana. Anyway, as for our race, Yes, as with all hand crossbow users, we've got 2 incredibly important feats to take, and it's really hard to be getting one of them for free at level 1, so we are going to go with Variant Human. I'm not planning on taking a half feat later, so I prefer the +1 to 2 abilities over the +2 to 1 ability that you get with Custom Lineage, which also gets a free feat, right? As for what that free feat should be, I'm going to say we got to start Crossbow Expert, which is just so strong. It does a number of things for us. It lets us ignore the loading property of crossbows, so we can fire them more than once per turn. It keeps us from suffering disadvantage if we make a ranged attack while an enemy is within 5 feet of us, as we otherwise would. And this is actually super great for this build, since we are, as I've said, going to be using Eldritch Blast eventually, and avoiding the disadvantage on ranged attacks with an enemy nearby doesn't just apply to crossbows with the Crossbow Expert feat, but for all ranged attack rolls, which would, yes, include even spell attack rolls. And that's really fantastic for when an enemy gets all up in your business. Finally, yes, when we make an attack with a one-handed weapon, we can make an attack with a hand crossbow as a bonus action. And since a hand crossbow is itself a one-handed weapon, we can now make 2 attacks with it per turn right at level 1, and that's just super, super strong. As for our ability scores, I assume we're going with the point buy method as always, and a HexBladeSinger is just going to be incredibly, incredibly mad. It might be their biggest weakness. So yes, assuming point buy as always, I'm going to say we should start with a 15 Charisma and take a +1 there from Variant Human, a 15 Intelligence and a +1 there, so we've got a 16 in both of our spellcasting stats, and then a 14 Con and only a 10 Dex probably. Getting to a 16 intelligence felt really important to me on this character so that we could get as much benefit from our Bladesinger abilities as possible, and also so that our wizard spells would be at least passable if we're to cast a wizard spell later that allows for an enemy saving throw. You might prefer to get a higher con instead, or even a dexterity or wisdom score for that matter. And I can see the argument for doing so, but I think intelligence is more important than any of those on this character at least. As for our equipment, I'm going to recommend starting with the gold buy method, as I often do, and say just make sure you pick up some scale mail and a hand crossbow and whatever other necessities you may have. We're going to be dropping that medium armor later, but at least for the first couple of levels it'll be nice to have with our terrible dexterity score especially. Do your best to take advantage of your ranged attacks and stay as far away from the other bad guys as you can, because you are pretty squishy. But then as a Warlock level 1, we get, right at the beginning, our otherworldly patron, our Warlock subclass, and yes, we're going Hexblade. It looks like they're going to be getting rid of the ability to get your subclass right at level 1 for some classes in 1D&D, which, to be honest, I am not upset by. I think it's probably going to be better for the game, both to just kind of make character class progression the same across all classes, and also to avoid really obnoxious min-maxing munchkins from constantly taking 1-level Hexblade dips all the time. Hate those guys. But 1D&D isn't out until 2024, so gather ye rosebuds while ye may, I suppose. As a Hexblade, right off the bat we get 2 really nice features. Hexblade's Curse, not something that I'm actually going to plan on talking about much when we crunch numbers, since it's really more of a burst damage, not sustained damage feature, I think. But it is a very strong ability. It tells us that once per short rest, with a bonus action, we can curse a single enemy, and thereafter, anytime we do damage to them, we do extra damage equal to our proficiency bonus. Also, we score a critical hit when we roll a 19 or a 20, and if they die while cursed, we regain hit points equal to our Warlock level plus our Charisma modifier. This will be great to pull out in a fight against a big bad or any other enemy that you're sure is going to take a few rounds to bring down, but otherwise giving up our bonus action to use it will be a little painful, because both Bladesingers and actually Hexblades often are going to be a little bonus action heavy. But the other feature we get is Hex Warrior, and this is the real gem for us. It gives us proficiency in medium armor and martial weapons. It also lets us touch one weapon upon finishing a long rest and turning it into our hex weapon, like I've said, which then allows us to use our charisma modifier for our attacks with that weapon only. And yeah, weapon can't have the two-handed property. We're golden. We also, of course, get first level warlock spells and cantrips. I'm going to say just make sure you pick up Eldritch Blast, like we talked about at the beginning. This fires a beam of crackling force damage energy and does 1d10 damage on a hit. And yes, the real beauty of the spell is that when it scales up at levels 5, 11, and 17, like all cantrips do, it fires more beams instead of just doing more damage with a single beam. And also can be upgraded with Eldritch Invocations, which sadly we're not going to be getting for a minute. As for level 1 spells, I'd grab Shield for sure, which is uniquely available to Hexblades among Warlocks, and, you know, lets us use our reaction to raise our armor class by 5 until our next turn when we're hit with an attack. Very, very strong defensive spell, as well as, I think, Armor of Agathis for some nice temporary hit points, as well as a way to return damage to melee enemies who hit you while you have those temporary hit points up. Being pretty squishy like we are, it'll be really important to get some ways to bolster our defenses. That's probably priority number 1 here for our spells. And there really aren't any spells I'd plan on using for sustained DPR at Warlock 1 anyway. Hex might be nice, but like I said, we're going to have a bit of a traffic jam as our bonus action as is. So I'm not going to plan on using Hex. But at level 2, as badly as I'd love to grab Eldritch Invocations, I want Bladesinger features even more, especially since Bladesingers don't get extra attack until level 6. Delaying it even 1 level like we have is already painful enough. I don't want to delay it any further, so at this point in our character's career, they have decided, whether because they were instructed or compelled by their patron, or simply out of a desire to gain additional power through more traditional means, to begin studying the arcane on their own and stop relying on their patron to dole them out additional power at their convenience. What's more, our hero has learned of an ancient technique long practiced among elves that allows them to hone both their magical as well as their martial prowess. And as someone who is intensely interested in both pursuits, they have begun studying and learning all they can about this practice to augment their already formidable skills. So yes, we're taking wizard levels now, and as such, we get Arcane Recovery, which tells us that once per day, after a short rest, we can recover spent spell slots equal to half of our wizard level rounded up, none of which can be greater than a 5th level spell slot. More spell slots, always good. As for the wizard spells that we should be taking here as a wizard one, I want to take Find Familiar, both for the fantastic scouting utility it offers, as well as the ability to gain advantage on 1 attack per turn for either us, or if we already have advantage, grant it to an ally, thanks to the Familiar's ability to take the help action on their turn, right? Beyond Find Familiar, I'd probably continue focusing on defense by grabbing like Absorb Elements, which lets us use our reaction to gain resistance to an elemental damage type when we take damage of that type, acid, fire, cold, lightning, and thunder, and also then do a little extra damage of that type on our next attack. Beyond that, I'd probably focus on taking things that offer utility, support, and control. Hideous Laughter, Silvery Barbs, Featherfall, Sleep is really good at early levels at least, Identify, etc. At level 3, we would be a wizard too, and this means we get our Arcane Tradition, our wizard subclass, and yes, we're taking blade singing. So finally, after our research and study and practice, we have unlocked the secrets of blade singing that we've been pursuing, and are now even more of a magical and martial force to be reckoned with. As a blade singer, we get a couple of features. We get training in war and song. This gives us some proficiencies in nothing that we need. Except proficiency in the performance skill, I suppose, if you didn't have that. But yeah, we get 1 melee weapon and light armor. We already had martial weapons and medium, so Hexblade gave us a lot more than that. But then we get Blade Song, which is just the best thing ever. It tells us that so long as we're not wearing medium or heavy armor, or using a shield or 2 hands to make a weapon attack, proficiency bonus times per day, we can use a bonus action to activate our Blade Song. So yeah, at this point, drop that scale mail, pick up some studded leather, right? As for what Blade Song does for us, it lasts for 1 minute, and it gives us the following benefits. 10 more feet of move speed, advantage on acrobatics checks, great for getting out of a grapple, among other things. An AC bonus equal to our intelligence modifier, and, you know, with our crappy dexterity, that means a 15 armor class with studded leather. Not amazing, but fortunately we're a ranged character, so that should help keep us safe a little bit. And then finally, a bonus action to our concentration checks, also equal to our intelligence modifier, which is especially welcome as we don't have Constitution saving throw proficiency. These are all some very welcome defensive buffs, no doubt. And maybe more importantly, conjures a fantastic image of a dexterous, bobbing and weaving martial character who is also throwing out spells. At level 4, we would be a Wizard 3, and we get second level wizard spells. And while of course you should consider Web and Misty Step and maybe Mirror Image and Hold Person and Invisibility and Suggestion and Tasha's Mind Whip and Vortex Warp, to be honest, there's nothing here that I'm going to plan on using in combat to improve our damage per round, our DPR. So yeah, go ahead and pick your favorites and enjoy playing with them. You could, I suppose, grab the Darkness spell here if you really wanted to. There's the whole take the Devil's Sight invocation and cast the darkness on yourself thing that we could potentially do. I'll talk more about that later, but if you're considering that tactic, just be aware, wizards can get darkness too. At level 5, we would be a Wizard 4, and that means our first ability score increase for feat. And yeah, I think we gotta go Sharpshooter. It's kind of a must-have for ranged weapon attackers, I think. As a reminder, it lets us make attacks with our ranged weapon from long range without suffering disadvantage like we otherwise would. For us, this means 120 feet with a hand crossbow, and yeah, if the battlefield is big enough, we should definitely be doing our best to fight from as far away as possible, at least at this point in our career. Sharpshooter also lets us ignore half and 3/4 cover if our enemies are trying to take cover from us, and then gives us a flat plus 10 damage on our ranged weapon attacks, so long as we're willing to take a -5 to hit penalty. And for those who don't know, when you look at the spreadsheets that I put in the video description of each video showing all of the numbers that I'm crunching here for these builds and comparing them to one another, I always mark the cell in yellow to indicate at what enemy armor class we should turn off either a Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, because the -5 to hit penalty is no longer worth using on average. So if you didn't know, now you know, Mr. President. Don't forget, at character level 5 now, Eldritch Blast fires 2 beams when we use it. We're not using it yet, but we will be soon. At level 6, we would be a Wizard 5, and that means 3rd level wizard spells. Ah, 3rd level spells, how do I love thee. Let me count the ways. Counterspell, Fireball, Tiny Hut, Catnap, Fly, Dispel Magic, Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, and on and on and on. But the one that I'm going to focus on here is Spirit Shroud. Such a great spell. It requires our concentration, takes a bonus action to cast, but thereafter, for the next minute, when you hit a creature within 10 feet of you, and it doesn't matter if it's a weapon hit or a spell hit, just a hit, you deal an extra d8 of damage. Also, that enemy that you've hit can't regain hit points until your next turn, and enemies who start their turn within 10 feet of you have their move speed reduced by 10 feet. So many fantastic benefits. The biggest problem with the spell, honestly, at least for this build, is that it takes a bonus action to cast. I truly hope that at your table, you can use your action to just take a second bonus action on your turn instead. It seems like most tables allow this, but rules as written doesn't work. I really hope that that's something that Wizards of the Coast allows in 1D&D. Without it, if we wanted to cast this spell during combat, it would mean that we're using a bonus action on round 1 probably for this, and then on round 2 for Blade Song, and thus not getting our full damage rotation going until round 3. And that's super painful. But at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. And unfortunately for us, no, we don't have extra attack yet, and that makes me sad. But it's okay. I am going to assume that you have Spirit Shroud going, though I really hope that you could either get it and Blade Song going on round 1 with both your bonus action and action, or that you could see combat coming and were able to get one or the other off before combat started. Of course, Blade Song isn't strictly necessary for our damage, since it doesn't technically add to our DPR directly, but it will, yes, help add to our defense and hold on to concentration and get us into and out of the 10-foot range that we need to be in to enjoy Spirit Shroud damage. So it's still pretty important to be using when we have it available. Regardless, assuming we've got Spirit Shroud up, we would be making 2 weapon attacks on our turn with our hand crossbow, thanks to Crossbow Expert. The first attack would be made with advantage thanks to our familiar, and the second without. And you know, considering the plus 10 damage to each hit that we'd get from Sharpshooter, and the extra D8 of damage per hit from Spirit Shroud, it's decent damage. All told, if both of our attacks landed, we'd be doing 2d6 plus 2d8 plus 26 damage. And thus, against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 31 damage per round, and against enemies with a 15 armor class, it would be 21 DPR. And yeah, like I've kind of warned, that's not amazing. It puts us like in the middle of tier 4 compared to other sustained damage builds I've done to date at this level. I warned you, but I think if we really want to make the most out of a combination of these 2 subclasses, the way we've gone is the way we want to go. And sure, since you're not really bringing down the house with your amazing damage per round, though it's not bad, you very well may want to focus on being more of a traditional spellcaster in combat here, throwing out a solid control spell on round 1 instead of Spirit Shroud. Web could potentially restrain multiple enemies, right? Hypnotic Pattern, Fear. Doing this is going to let you bring quite a bit to the battlefield, as well as pump out some way better than most wizards at this level sustained DPR. But regardless, I've got some great news. Things are about to get way better for us damage-wise. Because yes, at level 7 we would be a wizard 6, and this means as a Bladesinger we get extra attack. And as a Bladesinger, that means we can either make 2 attacks when we take the attack action, or better yet, make 1 weapon attack and cast a cantrip. So yeah, this is kind of where everything really comes together for this build. Now, on our turn, we would be making 1 hand crossbow attack with our action, 1 with our bonus action, and then throwing out Eldritch Blast for 1d10 damage times 2 for 2 beams. And assuming we had Spirit Shroud up, since Eldritch Blast fires twice here, that would mean an additional d8 of damage on 4 attacks on our turn, and that's kind of awesome. At level 8, though, of course, since we are now using Eldritch Blast regularly, it's time to go back to Warlock here for a minute to grab, yes, Eldritch Invocations. Eldritch Invocations are all fantastic and unique and fun buffs that come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Most importantly for us, though, naturally is Agonizing Blast. This lets us add our Charisma modifier to our Eldritch Blast damage, and that is pretty unique among spells, and particularly powerful for something that fires multiple attacks. As for our second invocation, there's like 4 that I really want. First up, Devil's Sight lets us see in both magical and non-magical darkness, and considering that we are a non-dark vision variant human, that's really worth considering, even if you don't plan on casting the darkness spell on yourself for advantage, which yeah, we could do, but I'm not assuming that we're going to be. And really, mechanically, that's because 1 of our crossbow attacks is already getting advantage from our familiar, and thus, as a result, it makes Spirit Shroud the better use of our concentration damage-wise than darkness. Not to mention, Spirit Shroud has the added benefit of not annoying everybody else at our table, like darkness can do. Of course, if your familiar is regularly targeted and taken out by your DM, or for whatever reason otherwise not able to provide you with advantage, then the Darkness plus Devil Sight tactic ends up being slightly superior numbers-wise for our concentration at all but the lowest enemy armor classes. I'm talking like 14 enemy AC or lower. That said, if you decide to forego Devil Sight, Eldritch Mind would be a really great choice here, as it gives us advantage on our concentration checks. So I'm probably going to be picking between those 2. Then again, Repelling Blast would be really nice to knock enemies 10 feet away from you when you hit them with Eldritch Blast, though maybe even better for this build would be Grasp of Hadar to pull them 10 feet closer to you when you hit them with Eldritch Blast. Since enemies need to be within 10 feet of you to get that Spirit Shroud damage. Both of those are compelling. I apologize that you have so many great options worth considering. Now, at level 9, now that we've got our extra attack and our very important Agonizing Blast, I want to take an ever so brief multi-class detour. See, at this point, our hero is flush with magical prowess, but they're feeling like their martial skills could use just a little extra polishing. Maybe they've got a friend in the party who can really help them zero in on their ranged weapon use. Or they could lean on an NPC for a little extra training. However you work it into your story, yes, I want to take a single level of fighter here. Not for the second wind feature that we'd get as a fighter 1. It's nice, it tells us that once per short rest, we can use a bonus action to heal ourselves for a 1d10 plus our fighter level. But no, we are here, of course, to pick up a fighting style, which fighters also get at level 1, and naturally we would want the archery fighting style, which lets us add a +2 to hit with ranged weapon attacks, and especially for those of us using sharpshooter, that's just really, really great. Now, some of you may be asking, why not take the fighting initiate feat to grab this fighting style instead? It's definitely worth considering. For me, especially with the multi-classing that we're already doing, it feels slightly less painful to give up a single level now that we have Eldritch Invocation and extra attack than it would to give up an ability score increase or feat for the archery fighting style. There are a lot fewer ASIs and feats for us than there are character levels, frankly. And we're barely going to get to a 20 charisma on this character by the end of our progression as is. Sure, feel free to just go back to Wizard here to focus on that all-important spell progression, but a 1-level fighter dip is the best thing we can do for our sustained DPR numbers at this level right now, I think. Speaking of which, at level 9, it's time for our next damage report. Quite a bit has changed for us since last check, primarily in the form of extra attack, which is going to let us now, yes, throw out a couple of Eldritch Blast beams on our turn, peppered in with our hand crossbow attacks. We've also picked up Agonizing Blast, so those blasts add our charisma modifier to the damage, and yes, a +2 to hit for our crossbow attacks, letting us more consistently land those juicy +10 to damage sharpshooter fueled crossbow attacks now. And thus, against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would do on average 61 damage per round, and against enemies with a 16 armor class, it would be 42 DPR. And yeah, that's more than double since last check against most enemy ACs anyway, putting us now comfortably in the middle of tier 2. We just totally jumped over tier 3 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done today at this level. Much, much better. And of course, still chock full of all that sweet utility, control, and even area of effect damage options that wizards bring to the table. We are really feeling our HexBladeSinger selves at the moment. At level 10, yeah, time to go back to wizard. Nothing is going to do more for us at this point than spell progression. So we would, as a wizard 7, get 4th level spells. 4th level spells are fantastic, including Polymorph, Dimension Door, Banishment, and many other marvels. I think the one that I would make sure to grab here is Greater Invisibility, though. It has all of the great taste of Darkness and Devil Sight, but without the making everybody at your table hate you calories. Greater Invisibility, unlike its cousin Regular Invisibility, does not end when you make an attack or cast a spell. Thus, when you cast it on yourself, you can enjoy advantage on your attacks and disadvantage on enemy attacks against you, so long as those enemies don't have a way to see your invisible self, just like with Darkness and Devil Sight, right? Again, though, we do continue to get a little more mileage damage-wise out of Spirit Shroud, so long as we're still getting advantage on at least one of our attacks per turn thanks to our familiar. Greater Invisibility, still a nice option to have in your pocket when you need it though, especially if your familiar gets taken out or something. At level 11, we would be a Wizard 8, and that means another ability score increase or feat, and yes, that means we get to bump our charisma, finally, getting it to an 18. Man, just imagine if we hadn't gone Variant Human. We would only now just be getting to Sharpshooter here. It'll be nice when 1 D&D comes out and gives all characters a free feat at level 1, right? Even if those feats are a lot less powerful than ones we'll be able to pick up later. Maybe I should be careful what I wish for. But yes, I think we've got to bump our charisma here. It raises our damage for both Eldritch Blast and our crossbow attacks, and just must be done. Don't forget, at character level 11, Eldritch Blast now fires 3 times when we use it, and that is huge for our damage. At level 12, we would be a Wizard 9, and that means 5th level wizard spells. And of course, there's Dominate Person, Hold Monster, and Synaptic Static, and so many other great ones. But do keep in mind that we still are only sitting at a 16 intelligence, and we're level 12 right now. I'd probably be prioritizing spells here that just work regardless of our spellcasting modifier. And thus, I want to focus on 2 really amazing options, both of which would require our concentration if we use them. So we wouldn't be able to do Spirit Shroud too, right? But both of them are going to be worth it at times, depending on the situation. First up, Wall of Force, of course. Oh, that rhymed. One of the best control spells in the game. It just throws down an invisible force field that enemies don't get to save against. They're simply trapped behind it. No wizard should ever leave home without it. And 2, yeah, sure, Animate Objects. It's just an amazing and fantastic spell for damage. Not to mention for the fun shenanigans that you can get up into with this spell, and even like puzzle solving and utility capabilities that it enables. Anyway, I very recently did a video that was kind of all about trying to maximize animate objects. The time wizard Kroner I might be out of cards at this point. So I don't want to spend too long talking about this spell here, but for a quick reminder, animate objects, you animate up to 10 objects, and then they can also attack your enemy. And when you have 10 of them all together, yeah, they hit like a truck. Now, I talked a lot about this in the Time Wizard video, but the reality is that quite a few enemies in 5e are probably going to have resistance to the attacks from these animated objects. Unless your DM decides that since they're animated by a spell, their attacks do count as magical for the purpose of overcoming enemy resistance to non-magical attacks, right? Most don't make that assumption for what it's worth. And sure, while there might not be as many enemies with that resistance as we often tend to think, there are still a lot that are. And the higher level we get, the more of them there tend to be. So, should we use Animate Objects instead of Spirit Shroud for our concentration here? I mean, Spirit Shroud can now be upcast with that 5th level spell slot to do 2d8 damage on a hit, and Eldritch Blast is now firing 3 times, meaning that we're making 5 attacks per round. That's potentially 10d8 extra damage. So the answer to the question is, it all depends. It all depends on whether or not our enemy has resistance to attacks from non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, right? Or, I guess, for that matter, if they can just like fireball a lot of your animated objects and take them out. If they do, or they can, then Spirit Shroud comes out ahead by a pretty big margin here. But if the enemy does not have that resistance, or the ability to do massive area of effect damage on your animated objects, then Animate Objects wins for damage until you get into very high enemy armor classes, like I'm talking 23 and up. So, for now, when I crunch numbers, I'm going to assume that the enemy doesn't have resistance to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, since more enemies don't have that resistance than do, even at challenge rating 13 and above. But know your options, know which one's going to perform better, under what circumstances, and of course, if you'd just rather play it safe, since you don't know what resistances the enemy that you're fighting may or may not have, feel free to just use Spirit Shroud and you'll be fine. The damage is only going to be a few points less at most enemy ACs that you're going to be fighting at this level anyway. At level 13, we would be a Wizard 10, and that means we get Song of Defense, and you know, this ability is not bad, honestly. It tells us that when we take damage, we can use our reaction and spend a spell slot to reduce the damage we took, equal to 5 times the spell's slot level. Obviously, if Shield can keep an attack from landing, or if Absorb Elements can just give you resistance to the damage that you took, then that's a much better use of our reaction and just requires a 1st level spell slot. But sometimes you get critically hit, right? Or hit by a force damage spell. And if Song of Defense can be the difference between going unconscious and not going unconscious, then yeah, it's worth spending a spell slot for, I think. So it's a decent defensive option to have when your other defensive options won't cut it. At level 13, it's time for our next damage report, and since our last check, we've seen a much needed bump to our charisma score, and our Eldritch Blast fires 3 times when we use it. Also, we are probably concentrating on animate objects here, assuming that the enemy has an armor class below 23 and they're not resistant. And if we decide to use Spirit Shroud instead, just remember that we can upcast that for 2d8 damage now per hit, which is awesome. But anyway, assuming animate objects, against enemies with a 10 armor class, we would on average now do 123 damage per round. And against a 17 AC, it would be 82 DPR. And that's really good. Again, we've basically doubled since last check. Sheesh. And for the record, Spirit Shroud would have been 105 and 72 respectively, so still really strong. Yeah, this build scales exceptionally well. Now we're kind of in the middle of the pack tier 1 compared to other builds I've done to date at this level. Making all of those attacks that we get to make, 2 of them with Sharpshooter, really adds up. So much fun. All right, at level 14, we would be a Wizard 11. That means 6th level spells. Contingency and Mass Suggestion would probably be the front runners for consideration here, I think. Though Mass Suggestion allows for a saving throw. We do have a 16 intelligence, which isn't terrible, and Mass Suggestion targets multiple enemies who all have to make a wisdom saving throw, which means you'll probably succeed on at least a few bad guys if you used it. It doesn't require concentration. I mean, you definitely shouldn't be simply upcasting animate objects here to get 2 more animated objects. What a waste of a 6th level spell slot, right? At level 15, we would be a Wizard 12. And we get another ability score increase or feat, which means we can finally cap our charisma, taking it to 20, giving us a +5 to hit and damage on every single attack that we're making, and we're making lots. Don't you dare take Resilient Constitution or Resilient Wisdom. There's no way I would ever take damage and thus need better defenses. At level 16, we would be a Wizard 13. And that means 7th level spells. I mean, Force Cage, which is even better than Wall of Force, right? Doesn't require a concentration either. Simulacrum, which is wonderful if you have the snow and the money and the time to cast it, and the thing that you create somehow manages to survive. As most of you know, I never really assume the spell in combat. I mean, teleport, fantastic utility. But of course, I'm just going to assume that we're going to use that 7th level spell slot like a moron to upcast Spirit Shroud. Nope, not animate objects anymore, as I'll explain in a minute. And then finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Wizard 14, and that means we get Song of Victory as a Bladesinger, and this ability just pisses me right off. On most Bladesingers, it's amazing, but for us, it's worthless because it lets us add our intelligence modifier in damage to all of our melee weapon attacks while our blade song is active. Son of a! I hope you can convince your DM that this should apply to all of your weapon attacks, regardless of whether it's a melee weapon attack or not. If you can't, I suppose you could consider going back to Fighter here instead to pick up Action Surge, which would be great for burst damage purposes, maybe even get a subclass in Fighter eventually, Rune Knight or Battle Master. Of course, Warlock levels would get you a Pact Boon, more invocations. I think though, if we're being honest with ourselves, at this point in the game, 8th and 9th level spells are just on the horizon, and it seems a little silly to me to be moving away from Wizard as a result, just because we don't get to apply the damage from Song of Victory. But hey, I've done sillier things before. Anyway, I'm not going to assume that we get to add that damage to our crossbow attacks for Song of Victory here, so I'm taking Wizard 14 and not really gaining much from it, at least on the spreadsheet. If there were a 1 level dip I could take somewhere else to add to our sustained DPR, I probably would have. But anyway, don't forget that Eldritch Blast now at character level 17 does fire 4 beams, so at least we're getting something to really improve our damage at level 17, regardless of the decision we make on whether we go Wizard or not. And so, for our final damage report, since last check, we have capped our charisma score, gained 7th level spell slots, which, thanks to the fact that Eldritch Blast now fires 4 times for a total of 6 attacks on our turn, and Spirit Shroud could potentially be upcast as a 7th level spell to do 3d8 damage on every hit. Spirit Shroud will now outdamage even animate objects upcast as a 7th level spell too, at all but the lowest enemy armor classes. So let's go ahead and assume we're going back to Spirit Shroud now. And frankly, that makes me happy, because I love that spell. But now, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 160 damage per round. And against an enemy with an 18 armor class, it would be 117 DPR. And yeah, that basically puts us right at the top of tier 1 compared to all the other sustained damage builds that I've done to date at this level, except the Cheese Grater. I definitely don't have cards to point to that. How about a nice thumbnail? And yeah, even outpacing just the straight class Bladesinger, that Bladesinger 2.0. Though of course, Bladesinger 2.0 did have 9th level spells by now. Anyway, it definitely took us a while to get this high on the charts, right? But if you're going to be playing a character late game and you're looking for really high sustained damage, it would be pretty tough to find anyone that can outshoot the HexBladeSinger. So let's go over final thoughts. The tier score for this character, if you were to take the damage that they did at all of the armor classes that we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports and just average them all into one big number, we'd end up with a 62, which puts us like near the bottom of tier 1. And that's awesome. So yeah, there are 2 things that I really love about this build, in addition to the fact that they are mostly a wizard with all of the wizard goodness that inherently entails. First, I love how it scales. There's something to be said for playing a character who feels like they legitimately and significantly get more and more powerful as the game goes on. It's a little bit harder to do than you might think, especially as you get into late game, I feel. At least if we're talking about just sustained damage numbers, right? Not talking about getting more and more powerful spells. I mean, the power curve of this character just kind of goes like this. It doesn't really plateau. Sure, I'm assuming that we're using our high-level spell slots for damage, but you could still be throwing out some really fantastic control and utility spells when you need them, and that's what makes playing a good Gish so much fun. All that sexy damage with all the potential utility and control that a good caster brings. But you know what my favorite thing about this build might be? I feel like most, if not all, of the Gish characters that I've built to date are really just making weapon attacks and using whatever spells they have access to just enhance those weapon attacks. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a lot of fun. But the real fantasy about playing a spell sword, or I guess in our case a spell bow, is that you're actually making both weapon attacks and slinging spells, right? All the time. Just enhancing your weapon attacks is great and fun too. But even my Bladesinger builds are mostly just using that cantrip they get for extra attack to just do Booming Blade, right? It doesn't really feel like you're making a weapon attack and throwing out spells. You're just kind of making weapon attacks and then making a harder weapon attack. This build actually gets to do both weapon attacks and spell slinging every single turn for reals. Thump, thump, pew, pew. And as a result, this just might be the next Bladesinger that I play, because it really fulfills that weapon damage spell thrower fantasy. So anyway, that's the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I hope you know how much I love you. You are so awesome. Thanks for all that you do for the channel, for me. I hope you'll check out the rest of the content in the channel if you're not in the habit of doing so. But more than that, I hope you have a very fun and safe new year and a wonderful 2023, and that you be good and kind and happy, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. Time to set up. See, the fiddly fig, it needs sunlight and the windows are over here, but I like having it over there because I feel like it balances the room better. And the chair is also by the window, so if you want to read, it just doesn't look as good. That's better. Maybe it's much too early in the game. Ah, but I thought I'd ask you just the same. What are you doing New Year's? New Year's Eve. What are you doing New Year's Eve? It's coming quick. I hope you got plans. I'm actually going to be in Vegas. Anybody else? Anybody else in Vegas? It's not something I've ever done before. Taking my wife to a couple of shows. Should be good times. Well, don't say that. Well, don't say that yet. Well, no, don't even say that. You know what? Don't even say any of that. I hate it when my stormtroopers get cut off at the skull cap. Because this just kind of looks like it might be a picture of a sunset or a beehive. No. The stormtroopers deserve more respect. Why am I always rubbing my boobies? Either don't say that or don't say it when I said it before. Don't say that. Maybe put that in earlier somewhere. Find a good place. Well, don't even say that. I need to erase that. I am super fine. Skull, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, right? Bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. Oh, my goodness. Don't even say that. Well, no, actually I will be, so don't say that. Well, do say that, actually. Oh, man, my hair is getting so long and shaggy. Maybe it's time for a haircut. Really? You think so?